But I'm very proud also to be chairman of the Institute of War and Peace Reporting, which feels very privileged to manage these important awards on behalf of the Kurt Schork Memorial Fund. From both of these roles, and indeed from my own previous life as a journalist and editor, I have an acute sense of the skill and the courage that it takes to be a really excellent frontline reporter. And that's a challenge that is made even more perilous for freelancers, which these awards uniquely celebrate. At IWPR, we have been at the sharp end, and I say we, I have not been at the sharp end, but the people who are IWPR have been at the sharp end of these risks, because we operate in extreme environments on several continents, in most of the most difficult places in the world. And local journalists, whom it's our mission to support, are especially at risk because, as we all know, they cannot simply take the next flight out. For us, the last year has been terribly painful. We've experienced the tragedy of 5 lives cut short in the service of honest reporting. 5 local journalists that we trained in Iraq and elsewhere, who worked with IWPR and other media to provide some of the best reporting, sometimes the only reporting available from crisis areas. Challenged by this, we are establishing the Saha Journalists Assistance Fund, named after one of our winners tonight, who was a very, very close colleague of ours. So we can at least provide some support, some better support, in the worst way for those we work with. Meantime, we can only really express our gratitude for the expert advice and supportive counsel we've received from the broader media community, particularly the frontline chairman and former IWPR trustee John Owen, and the Schork Fund vice president, and I'm proud to say new IWPR trustee Stephen Jukes. So thank you very, very much for being here. My only other task this evening is to introduce our MC, Christiane Amanpour, who was recently awarded a CBE for services to journalism. long overdue, and obvious enough from her long and fantastic frontline career at CNN. But her close friendship with Kurt and her fulsome support for the fund and the importance of these awards is another marvellous sign of that commitment. So that it is very special, with very special pleasure, that I hand over to Christiane this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David, and thank you, everybody. What a great turnout. You might think it's a little odd that I stopped to bring my apple juice up here, but it's because I got a phone call today from one of our brotherhood who were in Bosnia all together, Ed Vuljami, and he said, it's good that we're getting together because we can raise a glass to the man with the glasses. And you just saw the picture of Kurt Schork, many pictures of Kurt Schork in his working life run through the screen there. And I think, this year I'm not going to cry because every year we get very, very moved and emotional about what happened nearly 8 years ago and what it meant to all of us, certainly those of us who loved him and who worked alongside him. But I think looking at those pictures this year, there's actually something to celebrate. There always has been something to celebrate, but I feel especially this year because with time maybe we can step back and remember the light that he brought us. We can remember the collegiality that he stood for. We can remember that at a time and in an environment of desperate competition, a young journalist really going out there to make their mark, to do the best they can, he inspired amongst all of us in that little tight-knit group of the Sarajevo Press Corps a deep friendship, a deep respect for each other's work. And he, along with myself and others, such as Martin Bell from the BBC, all the agencies, Reuters, AP, and all the electronic media groups, basically instituted an unprecedented arrangement, which was called the Sarajevo Pool. And what that meant was that we decided amongst ourselves, and then we presented it to our corporate leaders, we decided that we were going to share. We were going to share the burdens, the dangers, and the actual raw footage. We would go out and we would not all go to the same cluster and put ourselves all at risk for one event. Instead, we would go around, we would share that burden, and when we came back, we would swap and share and exchange the information. And this, for young journalists who were starting out and who got their training wheels, if you like, taken off in this particular work, in this kind of war coverage, was a remarkable lesson because it taught us the value of, yes, competition, but also friendship, collegiality, and respect for each other. And we knew that we weren't all going to go out and rush blindly into danger just for the sake of trying to make a mark when we didn't need to. Yes, there were stories, and Kurt certainly broke many of them, which were exclusive, but we knew that when it was not necessary, we didn't have to go out and put each other and put ourselves at risk unnecessarily. And this has stuck certainly with me, and I'm sure all of us who were part of the Sarajevo Press Corps for all those many years. You can't say enough good about Kurt because he did epitomize the kind of mature, responsible, dramatic journalism that I think that really defines or should define what we do. And frankly, the longer it goes, the more time passes, the more we appreciate Kurt and his influence on all of us and the integrity that he stood for, the seriousness that he stood for. He was never mean, he was never gotcha kind of journalist, he was never unpleasant, even to those who he was holding rigorously to account. But he was serious and he never let go. And you couldn't go to a press conference, you couldn't be a leader or an official and sit at a press conference and expect to be able to spin your way out of it or dance your way out of answering the tough questions when Kurt was at that press conference. There's a great quote from one of the leaders of certainly American television journalism, Fred Friendly, who once said, our job is not to make up people's minds or to set the agenda. Our job is to make decision-making such agony that the only way to escape that agony is to think about it, is by thinking. And certainly Kurt made those people whom he interviewed, whom he talked to, think about what they were doing and think about how they would answer the questions that he put to them, and some of the questions that we wish that we had put to them. For us, being in Sarajevo was dramatically important. And I talk about Sarajevo because although he and myself and many of us who were there then have done many other things, I do believe that the Bosnia War was the defining moment of our generation. That is where we learned what it meant to be war correspondents. That is where we learned what it meant to recognize the reality of what was going on. We learned that we could not draw a false equivalence, even though we were being urged to draw an equivalence between all parties. It's where we faced for the first time on our watch, in our backyard, genocide in front of the 20th century mass media, and where we were forced to make a decision on how we were going to report, on what we were going to say, that it wasn't okay to just say all sides are equally guilty like the world leaders were saying, that it wasn't okay to say this was just an intractable, centuries-old ethnic conflict, that we had to call it like it was, and that was dangerous. It put us at risk on the ground, and it made us deeply unpopular with the world leaders and with our own leaders, which of course we didn't care about, but it was our point of maturity. It was where we learned what it meant to be a real journalist in the real world. And I think Kurt was really the professor. He was really the man from whom we all learned, and whenever there was a question, whenever we were in doubt, whenever we wanted confirmation of a story, we would call Reuters and we'd ask to speak to Kurt. And when he told us, we knew it was right, and we would go with it. And on that note, I just want to say that he is much more than one journalist who was felled in the course of duty. His legacy remains, and as I say, it's very difficult to find people who hold and who stand up to that standard that he set. And it's more and more difficult now because what we did then and what he did then is less and less respected, is less and less part of the body of journalism. Too often, too much of our airwaves, our newspaper print is devoted, unfortunately, to the unserious, to the sensational, to the tabloid. And so again, I say we were lucky to be where we were when we were there and with the people who we were with. Kurt's death also, sadly, he had to die, but his death propelled our leadership to take journalist safety seriously, to realize that it costs money and it costs resources and it costs goodwill to protect journalists who are willing to go out and put their lives at risk to be the eyes and the ears of the public. And there were people for whom, there were people like Rodney Pinder and others who I'm going to introduce in a second to come up here and take over, who took the lead in that fight, who took the lead in putting journalist safety at the top of the agenda. And it hasn't been easy, and to be frank, it's taken up a lot of resources, and sometimes it prevents and takes the space in terms of resources of what we would like to be able to spend in terms of going out and covering the story. But it's essential, and many people's lives have been saved, many journalists' lives have been saved since Kurt and his colleague and our friend Miguel were killed that day in May of 2000 in Sierra Leone, because then everybody started to take it really seriously. And sadly to say, the Committee to Protect Journalists, year after year for the last several years, has reported that the leading cause of death amongst journalists today in the world is deliberate. We're not just caught in the crossfire. We are deliberately targeted because they want to silence the messenger. They don't want to hear the truth. And so I'm going to ask Rodney Pinder to come up, Director of the International News Safety Institute, to talk about the impact on that regard that Kurt's death has, and the impact that it's made on keeping us all much safer states, Rodney.
Thanks, Christiane. Seems to be a time for apple juice. Defeated by the technology. Thanks, Christiane. That was, I find, brought back lots of memories of Kurt and what he stood for. I remember the first time I met him on a story. It was in South Africa, where he was taking a break from the Balkans to come and help us cover the transition. He was looking for a bit of excitement, as always. So we sent him up to Zululand, where the Inkatha and the ANC were hacking each other to bits with gay abandon, and he brought some depth and experience from the Balkans to that story, and gave it a colouring and a palette of beautiful descriptive words that I think got to the depths of it in a way that we hadn't before. Anyhow, I'm sure Kurt enjoyed it, because the next transition story was in Hong Kong, where I was heading up to China, the Reuters team there, and Kurt arrived again. And I was thinking, well, Kurt, it's a bit of a peaceable story. There's really nothing much going on. And he thought, well, we'll have to think of something. I said, well, up to the China border, and you can do the Red Army sweeping in and taking over the old colony, and right, bang on. So we went up there, but I think, much to the disappointment of most of us, nothing really dramatic happened on that story, apart from the weather, because it chucked down the whole time. And the glorious moment when a member of the Black Watch was caught in a gust of wind which blew up his kilt and exposed a bare bum as he was lowering the Union flag for the last time. But Kurt enjoyed himself, and of course we enjoyed working with him. I think Christiane touched on a very, very profound point. That in days when journalists now, particularly in the Western world, especially in the Western world, are held in such low esteem, I think we're down there amongst the estate agents, second-hand car salesmen, and even politicians, that serious reporters who report stories as fearlessly and as correctly and as truthfully as they can, with a dedication to the truth and exposing the dark side of our society, are not as appreciated as they once were. Except, funnily enough, in their own countries. One of the things I've learned since we started up the International News Safety Institute was that the journalists today most under threat, and most of the journalists being killed, are not the international war correspondents. They are the local journalists working in their own countries, trying to do a daily job of uncovering the dark side of society, of covering crime and corruption and political skullduggery, and they're dying by the score. Their dedication is really, truly amazing when you think of the lack of support and the general lack of recognition that they have, yet they go out there daily to provide the news. Almost 1,000 of our colleagues in the news media have died since that dreadful day in May 2000, when Kurt and Miguel Gil Marino were killed in an ambush in Sierra Leone. The figures have been rising inexorably. Each year, it seems, is worse than the year before. A record 168 of our colleagues died last year trying to cover the story. Today, as of now, we're up to 166. So I think all the signs point to this year being worse than ever. This dreadful scenario led to the creation of the International News Safety Institute in 2003 in an attempt to do something practical to address the situation. After Kurt and Miguel Gil died in Sierra Leone, there was an event at the Freedom Forum organized by John Owen, who I hope is here tonight, but I think he's on his way back to the States. It was one of these seminal moments during the conversation, the debate about the incident in Sierra Leone. One of Miguel Gil's family stood up and said, look, you journalists really, you are a terrible waste of space. When something horrible like this happens, you all get together, you beat your breast, you moan and groan, then you go out and get drunk and forget all about it. So we decided then that something lasting had to be done. The two Richards, Richard Tate of ITN, Richard Sambrook of the BBC, Chris Kramer of CNN, and a few more of us, decided down then to set up the Broadcast News Security Group, which drew in the main agencies and the networks, which took a basic decision that things were getting too dangerous. And we decided to try to remove the competitive element when journalists' lives were at risk. We recognized that conflict reporting could never be safe. We recognized that efforts towards safety could lead journalists down the path of avoiding good stories, of being safer rather than storifying the situation. But I don't think that's happened. But what we have done since then, and started to do that, was introduce a much more professional approach towards safety on the story, and a much more caring attitude amongst colleagues to look after one another's backs, as well as learning the basics of looking after themselves. So the Broadcast News Security Group then led indirectly to the formation of INSEE, which took the view, as the Broadcast Security Group did, that if journalists didn't look after themselves, nobody else was going to. We've achieved quite a bit since then, in practical terms. Last December, almost a year ago, we got a resolution through the UN Security Council which addressed for the first time the issue of the safety of journalists in conflict. We persuaded the British Army, the first of other militaries, I hope, to put journalist safety into their media military operations handbook for the first time. We conducted a global survey of the number of journalists who have died over the past 10 years in order to bring the facts to the international community. And I don't think many of us, even in the business, realized how awful the death toll was, and that 2/3 of all journalists who died were murdered. They were targeted for what they do. Worst of all, in more than 8 out of 10 of these cases, no one has been brought to justice. The question of impunity still torments us as we try to perform our work. INSEE, in this time, has trained, we started off in 2003, and we've provided free safety training to almost 700 journalists in the developing world, in 15 countries. We've just finished a course in Afghanistan. We've trained something like 130 journalists in Iraq. We've been to Somalia, the first safety training for journalists in Somalia. So we're quite pleased with our record, but we have an awful long way to go. And we're conscious of the work that lies ahead. So some good has come of the tragedy that scarred the first springtime of the new millennium. And I'm pretty sure, Kurt would have approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Rodney. So this is the 6th year of the Kurt Schork Memorial Awards. This is the second time it's been held in London, right here at the Frontline Club, and this is a perfect location for it. This was started shortly after Kurt died by his partner in life and former Reuters colleague, Sabina Kosic. She's here, and she'll be presenting these beautiful awards to the winners. But this was done in order to recognize the type of journalism and journalists that Kurt stood for. So a freelance journalist working for a big publication, and a local journalist working in their own country, and often either independently or helping the Western journalists who sort of fly in and rely entirely on those local journalists and fixers. This year there were more than 90 entries in the 2 categories. The preliminary judges, Nicholas Moore and David Rogers, formerly of Reuters, commended the high quality of all entries before weaning them down to about 7 candidates in each category. The 2007 Kurt Schork Award in International Journalism, the local category, goes to Sahar al-Haidari. She was 45 when she was shot down by insurgents in Iraq in June, this past June the 7th. That's a picture of her there on the screen. And according to Mosul's deputy police chief, where she was killed, her name was 4th on a hit list prepared by the so-called emir of the Islamic State of Mosul. Haidari was aware of the risks that her work entailed. Rodney was talking about the number of journalists who've been killed, and most of them are in their countries of origin. Iraq is one of the deadliest places for journalists today. There's Russia, there's Mexico, there are other places as well, but Iraq is really very deadly, and every journalist there knows the incredible risk they take in just even naming themselves a journalist. You may have seen in the New York Times recently, there was an editorial. The editors felt moved to write down the statement of a group of Iraqi women who just won a different award and did the same kind of work as Saha. Basically, they said, like I'm sure she said, that you can't even brag about being a journalist. You can't tell your children, you can't tell your friends, you don't know whether you're going to survive that day, you don't want anybody to know what you do, you can't have your picture broadcast or known around, and you have to keep what you do completely secret in case you're found out and killed by the people who want to silence you. In recent years, Saha had published articles under various pseudonyms, and she took many, many opportunities to leave the city to attend training courses either in Sulaymaniyah, the relative safety of Kurdistan, one place where Iraq actually does work, and also in Amman, Jordan. Sometimes she would go on short trips to Syria, and she had already moved her family out of Mosul, but she always wanted to go back. And I remember talking to Tony in the summer about her, in fact, in June, just around the time when she'd been killed, and how she did know that she was in danger, but she was so motivated, Tony, wasn't she, by her job and by her passion and by her commitment, and she obviously didn't believe that the worst was going to happen to her. But in declaring her the winner, the final judging panel of Lindsay Hilsum, Christina Lamb, Mona El Talwe, Brian Groom, and Ray Bonner, the judges said, quote, "Her investigation of the honor killing amongst the Yazidis was exceptional for its detail, its graphic description, and her interviewing of people close to the story, which is very difficult and dangerous in Iraq. The decision that this was an important story is borne out by the subsequent attacks on the Yazidis, which was not long ago. There is a passion to these stories and an eye for the telling," quote. And now here is Saha's colleague, Linda Jamil of the BBC, to read an excerpt of one of the winning stories that were written for IWPR and filed just a month before she was killed.
Honor killing sparks fears of new Iraqi conflict. Ashika, a small town sitting in lush green hills east of the city of Mosul, used to be regarded as an island of peace and stability, while vast areas of post-Saddam Iraq were plunged into civil war. Home to a population that is 70% Yazidi, members of an old sect that is neither Muslim nor Christian, Bashika was spared the sectarian and ethnic strife between Arabs and Kurds, radical Sunnis and Shia, that plagued surrounding areas. People from Mosul would drive 25 kilometers to Bashika to have picnics, to enjoy the tranquility of a little town there, where Yazidi temples, Muslim mosques, and Christian churches stand in close proximity, presenting a rare image of tolerant coexistence. Until April the 7th, that is, on that day, a furious mob stoned a 17-year-old girl to death, while bystanders applauded and filmed the killing on their cell phones. Her crime, Dua Khalil Aswad, a Yazidi, had run away from home because she had fallen in love with a Muslim boy. It was not the first love story of its kind, nor was it the first honor killing in a region where women are subject to strong social restrictions and face severe punishment for disregarding family, tribal, or religious traditions. The case highlights the absence of rule of law and the acceptance that family disputes should be dealt with by relatives rather than outsiders from the judiciary, even when the resolution involves murder. At least one eyewitness said members of the security forces stood by and did not intervene as Dua was stoned to death. The story began when Dua, a second-year student at the Fine Arts Institute in Bashika, fell in love with her neighbor, Muhannad, the owner of a nearby cosmetics shop. Muhannad used to wait for Dua after her college classes, and her parents were aware of the relationship. One hard and fast rule of Yazidi tradition is that marriage outside the faith is not permitted. To circumvent this, Dua reportedly asked Muhannad to elope with her. but he refused, saying that Muslim tradition recommends that both families give their blessings to a marriage. Finally, Dua decided to convert to Islam so that she could marry Muhammad. She informed her parents, who were not pleased, but did not take any action to stop her. They appear to have regarded her decision as a domestic matter and not one for the wider community. When her tribe learned of her conversion, the girl took refuge with a Yazidi cleric, a common practice when people fear retribution. She stayed in the cleric's home, and her parents begged him not to surrender her to anyone, according to Mustafa Muslim, a grocer in the town. On April the 7th, Aswad's uncles came to the cleric and told him that the family had forgiven the girl and wanted her to return with them. She thought they had really forgiven her, and she was going to her death, said Muslim. After just a few yards, Dua was surrounded by 13 of her cousins, together with a large crowd of other Yazidis. They started kicking and punching her, pulling her hair, and forcing her to the ground, said Muslim, who witnessed the event. She was shouting for help. Her father tried to get her, but the people stopped him. In a subsequent interview with a local TV station, the father said he had sent his brother to bring the girl home, but had no idea that a group was waiting to kill her. A brutal execution lasting 2 hours followed, most of which was filmed on mobile phones. The footage, which circulated first among Mosul residents and later on the internet, showed the girl on the ground surrounded by a frenzied crowd. Young men beat and kick her, first throwing small stones and then fetching bigger ones and large concrete bricks. The girl, bleeding heavily, desperately tried to protect her face with one hand and cover her naked legs with the other after her dress was being torn. After a while, she stopped moving. As she lay still, the cheering crowd continued to throw stones at her. Later, her killers took her body to the outskirts of town, burnt it, and buried her remains with those of a dog, to show they regarded her as worthless and dirty. A post-mortem showed that Dua had died of fractured skull and spine.
You can see why she won. That was an incredibly written story. And sadly, you know, it's not an exotic crime that's confined to Iraq. Honor killing happens right here as well as in many other parts of the world. And it really troubles me when people do it in the name of God and because they think that this is the right thing to do. When you read the kind of description that Saha wrote about it, you can really feel the outrage and the outrage of this. There's a short film we're going to see now on Saha. It begins with her on a speaking tour in the US with Iraqi journalists and ends with an interview with her husband.
أنا فقدت 14 زميل وزميلة قتلوا من الصحفيين في العراق خلال سنة.
Within a year, I lost 14 female and male friends who were journalists, working as journalists in Iraq.
هناك جماعات مسلحة دخلت إلى العراق.
There are gunmen groups who entered Iraq actually across the borders to Iraq.
تعلن الحرب والقتل وتبث العنف ضد العراقيين.
They announce war against the Iraqi people, only the Iraqi people.
مما سبب فقدان الأمن والأمان في العراق.
And this led to losing safety and security in Iraq.
دعاء تلك المرأة الحديدية التي تحدت كل الصعاب وأثبتت لكل زملاء المهنة وفي كل بقاع الأرض أن الشهادة في سبيل نقل الحقيقة شرف لا شرف يفوقه، ولتكون نجما ساطعا يتلألأ في سماء الحرية. سحر لن تموت لأنها تعيش في قلوب الفقراء التي طالما ما كتبت عنهم ونقلت معاناتهم، وأن روحها ستظل طيفا يلازم الأحرار وحدهم، بل ستظل رنين كلماتها تصدح في كل حدب وصوب. سنتذكر قوتك وشجاعتك يا سحر. سحر عرفتها شجاعة جريئة، أما وزوجة وأختا وزميلة، تقدس قلمها وواجبها، وتدرك أن الصحافة مهنة الانحياز للوطن والفقراء، ومهنة الواجب الأصعب، والنهج الوطني الواضح. ونحتاج في الوقت نفسه من عهد من الزملاء الصحفيين العراقيين أن يظلوا قابضين على حجر الحقيقة إلى أن يطفئوا نار حقد الأعداء. أقدم خالص تقديري وامتناني إلى معهد صحافة الحرب والسلام IWPR، وبالذات أستاذ عمار الشابندر والعزيزة سوزانا، وكذلك من كورت شورك لما قدموه من دعم للكلمة الحرة.
So to present the award on behalf of Saha's husband and family is the chairperson of the Kurt Schork Memorial Fund and the founding mother of this organization, to her friend Linda Jamil. And now we move on to the winner of the International Freelance category. That is Mario Kaiser, from his amazing story, The Devil's Path, which was published in Park Avenue magazine. One of the challenges of reporting this story, he said, was just to get the assignment as a freelancer. The reason was that he wanted to accompany a migrant from the beginning to the end of the journey. It is the story of a young Mexican woman's journey as an illegal immigrant to New York. Trying to follow her required putting himself in the hands of a smuggler, and while many magazines were interested in the story, none was willing to take the responsibility for this kind of reporting. So he went out and did it on his own. The judges said that this is a perennial story, brilliantly retold and made new. I found it compelling and could not stop reading, said one judge. Reporting and investigation were excellent, great attention to detail, and marrying up of individual experience with the broader political picture. It was well written. His resourcefulness and courage and committing himself in the hands of a coyote, the smuggler, are exceptional. Mario, I want you to stand up and come over here. Where are you, Mario? Be recognized and to receive.
go to the yellow one, then the speakers will pick you up. Thank you.
I want to thank Candida Merino for allowing me to be by her side when she went from a small town in Mexico to New York when her life changed. I want to thank my wife Gypsy for... I find it hard to speak after what we learned about Sahar. I want to thank my wife Gypsy for allowing me to disappear for long periods of time. When I research these kinds of stories, and to disappear some more when I hide in the room and I write them. And I also want to thank Sahar for refusing to look the other way and for being braver than most of us. I have never been on the front line. I was always more interested in the quiet stories far behind the front lines. I went to Iraq shortly after the invasion in 2004, when supposedly the mission was almost accomplished. And in the 3 weeks that I spent there, I was not scared once. Nothing happened to me that made me fear for my life once, except for on the day when I left Iraq and drove back to Amman and was stopped by the US military. The worst thing that happened to me was having a young soldier point a gun at me and curse at me, and to stand in the desert without shoes. And when I told this story on the border to 2 US soldiers, when I told them that I didn't think that was the way to win the hearts and minds of the Iraqis because of the way they treated my driver, whose name was Saddam. One of them looked at me, thought for a moment and said, "There are no hearts and minds in Fallujah. There are a lot of hearts and minds in the Iraq that I saw, and Sahar was one of them. I never met her, but I miss her. Thank you."
Congratulations to both our winners. And now we get to the second part. Traditionally, in the second part of this event, we have a panel discussion where we discuss one of the issues that, that is important to us and to journalism, to how we get the stories. And this year, it's about getting the real story out, how to access and verify stories from inside shut down and closed societies. And to be frank, this year, it's getting more and more important, whether it's from Burma, Iran, North Korea, all those places where it's really hard to get stories out of. You may have seen it on the screen, but Dame Anne Leslie on my far left is the foreign correspondent for the Daily Mail, Con Coughlin, executive foreign editor and frequent writer, correspondent, analyst for the Daily Telegraph. Mint Sway, on this side of me, is the senior journalist of the BBC Burmese service. Dr. Ali Pedram, the editor of, why can't I read this? Miane, IWPR's Iran project. Of course, I should know that name without having to put my glasses on. And Adel Darwish, author, journalist, and broadcaster here on my immediate left. Can I start with you, since why not? You're the only lady on the panel. And I want to ask you something because I brought it up. Kurt stood for the serious side of journalism. It's not that he was a totally serious person. He was a fun-loving person. We used to have great parties. But when it came to the job, he was serious about it. The Daily Mail is a tabloid. It's a very highly circulated and mass-read tabloid. How does foreign news play on the Daily Mail? What are you telling?
Well, I've always seen my job on the Daily Mail because, let's face it, our readers have got a lot of things to get on with, the school fees, the school run, all the rest of it. They don't terribly, naturally, want to know about the travails of people in countries of, faraway countries of which we know little and all that. So your job, writing about foreign politics in something like the Daily Mail, is to grab them. Now that is actually more difficult than you'd think. but I think I've done it quite well over the years. And you always have to think from the point of view of when somebody is, about to go to work and they've got the mail, they don't want to read about even Zimbabwe, which we have some connections with. Certainly not, for example, one of my most successful series was about Azerbaijan. Where is Azerbaijan? To try and make them interested is the main problem.
Okay, so why was it successful?
Because I keep my readers and the background of my readers in mind, because I think there's so many journalists who are writing for themselves or for fellow tribesmen, fellow foreign correspondents, so that they can get awards, they can be praised for this, that, and the other. I keep my readers in mind.
That's a very important point, actually. Can I ask you, Mr. Mint, am I saying that right? Look, Burma, Myanmar has been a big story, and none of the foreign journalists could get in a timely manner, since we're trying to figure out how to get accurate, important information out. How did that happen in Myanmar, Burma, in the latest crisis? And did the fact that is the fact that there weren't international journalists there, how did it affect the situation?
Actually, when we talk about Burma, it's really a dangerous place to cover. As you noticed, a Japanese journalist, video journalist, he was shot at point blank, and there's still a big row going on whether his sort of video camera will be allowed back or not. So it's a very vulnerable situation, and there's a lot of restrictions and censorship. But the problem is that most of the foreign journalists went inside undercover on a 14-day tourist visa, and at the same time, we have sort of locally accredited journalists from Reuters, AP, and other but they are under strict control of the government, because whenever they send out email or telex, they've been screened. So the problem about this big story coming out in various even in your homes, actually, because of the modern technology, the emergence of this civil journalists and the students and the young people, they make use of internet, and the bloggers compile it and send us. And soon after the government realized that the graphic pictures are going out of the country, they try and sort of control it by cutting out what we call that internet. And when we asked certain persons, like the famous monks and all, they cut the telephone line. So the way we try and get is that since for a long time we have had a good network of sort of contact person, we have a database about it, and once we got the news lead, we chat with them, and those who have no mobiles, we send them to the place, and mostly the news we sort of shared with others is about eyewitness accounts and the students, activists, but we have to be doubly aware to check whether they've been exaggerating or they've been using propaganda. But anyhow, we try and get out most of the pictures, and the government try and block out. But since in the border areas, we have a lot of stringers working on China, India, Bangladesh, mostly Thai. We have 3 from the south to the north. So always people are going out of the country where we have trade posts. So we
do you think we know anywhere close to the full story of what happened to the monks? You remember the first thing was maybe 10 people were killed, but obviously there's so much other reporting.
Yeah, the real actual thing happened sort of near the Great Shwedagon Pagoda. At that time, one lady who went there witnessed that 3 monks were brutally beaten and killed. So this lady was talking to her son in London, and that person sort of recorded on a mobile and rushed to our office and to share the news. And so we verified it with some of our contacts inside, and we just broadcast it in time for our transmission.
Let me ask Ali Pedram of the Iranian project, IWPR's Iranian project. Iran is not only under the spotlight today, but in a way, yes, you can get more news out of Iran because there's a lot more internet and satellite and a lot more a lot more ability of foreign journalists to go in. But is it getting more difficult today to get accurate, verifiable information out of Iran?
In some terms, yeah, it has become more difficult in terms of dissemination of information within the country, but the channels of communication to outside world actually has been on an increasing level, as you might know very well. What actually we are doing in Miane project is to enabling a young, talented Iranian journalists who want to be active journalists inside the country, but do not have necessary skills and instrument to communicate with outside world, giving them this opportunity to write for a Western audience. And through this interaction, they become more, of course, trained and capable to write, and then most importantly, giving them more ability to write for their local audience. That is the first point actually we are doing, and hopefully, because, you know, very quickly, if I can mention, one of the reasons reform movement during the whole Khatami period kind of failed, it was that easily the establishment, or hardline establishment, could shut down all reformist newspaper easily and somehow get rid of the journalists reporting on reform movements. Portion of them became silent inside the country, portion of them fled the country and went to exile. And now there is a lack of viable journalists inside the country being able to work and write for the outside world. It's either foreign correspondents residing in Iran reporting back, or it's only official newspapers or agencies. And what we are tackling is this monopoly inside the country.
Can I ask, Khan, you write quite a lot about Iran in the Telegraph. Where do you get your information from, and how do you verify it? Because it's so sensitive, and you know, I mean, I ask you, not facetiously, but you know there's so much conflicting information about what's going on there.
Well, it's an enormous challenge. I mean, first of all, most of what I write about Iran is more in the nature of commentary rather than factual reporting, and there is a very big difference in that. But it's very, very difficult, and you talk to a variety of people who have their own sources of information. You have to collate it, but you're not getting the whole picture. And Iran is an enormous challenge, not just for journalists, but for governments. And in fact, it's been a challenge for the West since the Iranian Revolution. And even today, we're not quite sure who's running the country. And we have this particular thing with Ali Larijani, who's been negotiating the nuclear program with the AE, the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna. He was sacked, but both he and his replacement turned up in Vienna to see the EU representative for the latest negotiation. So it is a challenge, but coming back to because I wear two hats. I oversee the foreign operation at the Telegraph, and I write. So, you know, on one side, I'm always fighting with the management, you know, we need to have foreign correspondence, we need to have a foreign budget, let's get out there and do this. And then I'm out there spending the money on behalf of the company sometimes. But what has changed dramatically since we were in Sarajevo, you know, going back to Beirut in the 1980s, is that with the internet, with the advances in communications, and we've seen this particularly with the Burma story, that you can get a lot more information more quickly than we had, say, 20 years ago. And it's very, very difficult for autocratic regimes, be it in Tehran or in Burma, to keep the lid on what's going on. And the other thing, coming back to the nature of this evening, I mean, what has always impressed me and continues to impress me is that when something happens in North Korea, in Burma, in Iran, there is no shortage of young men and women, freelancers, clever people who just want to get in there and get the story out. And I mean, the challenge for us is to make sure they're properly supported and properly equipped to go in, because sometimes you get people who are very enthusiastic about going into a war zone who really aren't that qualified, and you have to say, hang on a minute, you know, just wait your chance. It will come, but you know, you've got to learn the ground rules, and I think that's very important for every news organisation to make sure that you're acting responsibly in commissioning people to go into these places.
Can I ask Adel Darwish the same sort of question about how you get verifiable information, but from the flip side, if you like? Yes, as Khan and Ali have said, there are many more ways to get, and as Minta said, there's many, many more ways to get information out, even of closed societies. But what about this worrying reality about our own societies, democratic free press societies like the United States and Britain? Here we are in a situation which resembles, to an extent, some of the noise that went around about Iraq before the war with Iraq. There's a lot of noise going on around about Iran. How do we verify over here? And how do we sift through the spin, the propaganda, and the reality in a situation such as Iran, which, as we all know, is hard to pinpoint who's running what, who's saying what there, so we can tell our viewers and our readers, well, actually, hang on, the president says this, and we're rushing to war, but maybe it's this.
I think things are so different now from where I started, and perhaps, like what Khan said, if his job is actually on the desk, and liaising between the man or the woman on the ground and the desk back in London. I have to do it. I mean, remember my first assignment 38 years ago during the Biafra War, which was impossible to verify the information you get either from the army or an area the size of Wales with one post office with all the hacks queuing up to use a telex machine. So things with the internet are so different now. But you really, the editor on the desk needs really to use their heads and use every means available to balance the story and verify the information. The most famous one, the 45 minutes warning of Saddam's use of weapons of mass destruction. And people got excited about it. It turned out to be a Downing Street spin. And and I remember during the first Gulf War in Iraq, when I was working the independent foreign desk, and we had a man in Baghdad. And in fact, it was extremely difficult. Well, there were not many news organizations had people actually on the ground. However, we had to be aware of the fact that he could not move anywhere without the Ba'ath Party minders being with him. So only he's allowed to see what he's been allowed to see. And hence it's very important that you don't get too excited about running away what you think is a scoop. I know a colleague of ours actually ran a story in one of the national papers. There was a hotel in Baghdad, and a missile was actually fired, and he got the serial number of the missile and so on. But because in his excitement to get the scoop, he did not stop and think, who actually handed him that piece of missile? Again, it was actually the Iraqi government. They didn't say where it was felt, how did he get it, how old it was, and so on. And I think that is probably the safety valve will be actually people like Khan, will be people on the desk. But wait a minute, you're getting too excited on the ground, let's try to verify it by other means.
Yes,
yes, just picking up on 2 points. One is about, it's becoming very dangerous to be a journalist or a fixer or an interpreter who works for a journalist. Much more so than when I started, rather like Adele, I started, when the dinosaurs were still roaming the earth. Because on the whole, people, on whatever side they were on, they wanted you to tell their side of the story.
Their narrative.
Now, you have the internet which does that. So now, part of it, I think, is just fun. And I seem to remember, because when I was in Bosnia, the first time I'd ever heard that there were bounties if you shot a journalist. Now, I've been around, as I say, a long time. There were never bounties. And I think the other thing, which was picking up on keeping journalists safe, my newspaper, after a while, used to say you have to go with a Kevlar, flak jacket and helmet and everything, partly because of insurance. But there is something, I think, insulting for a journalist who comes onto a scene looking like a warrior at Agincourt, trussed up with absolutely every sort of safety things. You're talking to people with no Kevlar jackets, no helmets and everything. So I tended not to use them. In fact, the nearest I came to a war wound was when I dropped my flak jacket on my toe in Zagreb. I nearly broke it. But I think that there are two things there. The insurance companies, the feeling that, really now combatants in all these sort of civil things don't actually feel they need you because they've got the internet.
You know, you're absolutely right about that. Can we ask whether you have any questions for any of the panelists? Are you interested in how we get news from somewhere? Go ahead. Could you identify yourself and direct your question?
Brian Groom from the FT. It actually follows on from what Anne was saying. First, congratulations on having Anne Leslie on your extreme left, Daily Telegraph on your centre left. It's made my evening.
Well done for picking that up.
Extreme left.
The serious question is about the internet, and not so much about getting verifiable information out, but the effect of the outside world coming into some of these situations. I think there are two situations. One is that where about 6 or 7 years ago the wisdom was that the Chinese government would never be able to control the internet. It seems to have managed to do it with the Great Firewall pretty effectively. And in a lot of the reporting of the recent Burmese demonstrations, a lot of it said this time it's going to be different, and that is because there are so many channels to the outside world and the internet, and it will be a kind of unstoppable wave of information, which didn't. The outcome didn't seem to be exactly what was suggested. So my question is, in the age when people think there is the internet to get their stories out, and duplicity of duplication of information, a way of routes of getting information out, what's the role of the established media and of journalists in that?
Well, it's very difficult, I think, not least because everybody can do a blog. Everybody can produce an absolutely known fact story, which it isn't a known fact. It's some youth sitting in a hut who's just decided that this is the story. So for journalists having to look at the stuff that's coming over the internet, you have to have a huge health warning on everything. But the other thing, too, is I know we were all far too hopeful about the internet to begin with. You know, indeed, Murdoch himself said, you know, now there can't be any kind of sort of totalitarian societies because the internet will, penetrate them. But funnily enough, I do think actually the internet, although it's being stopped constantly by governments, I mean, for example, I did the Falun Gong sect thing, and this is a rather sort of peculiar, semi-New Age Chinese sect, which, for some reason or other, the Chinese government is totally hysterical about. And they ban them, they torture them when they find them. But they managed to bring down a whole lot of the Chinese government servers, somehow or other by infiltrating. So there is a kind of guerrilla movement among opposition groups in all of these countries to undermine the government control, and it's usually a sort of catch-up thing. I still think the internet has actually made such a huge difference to people feeling that they actually own their own news, and it's not up to us to decide what is the news, how you interpret it, but it also means we journalists have to be very careful what we pick up, you know, through diaspora, internet things and so on, and particularly with Iran. As you know, there's a huge Iranian diaspora, and I've worked in Iran, and half of the people who are activists there don't agree with the other half. So if you're going to be deciding, oh, this is a story, you have to see how many of these people actually agree it was a story. So again, it's a question of selectivity that you have to use.
I'll just make a quick point on this. There's a lot of material available on the internet, but in the case of Burma, for example, I don't think there's a news organisation worth its name that wasn't trying to get its own person on the ground. I mean, the Telegraph, I know, we got our man in there fairly quickly, posing as a tourist at great risk to himself, but we've got to get in there and verify this stuff. You get this wall of information coming through the internet. It's unverifiable. It can be a source, but it can also be a distraction. And you've got to get your own people in there, if you can.
Do you think we got the full story? I mean, is anybody here satisfied that we actually got the full story out of Burma?
No, I don't think so.
We should ask our colleague here, but I mean, from my view, I think...
In fact, we have a very good interactive service with Burmese citizens outside and inside, and we have a lot of emails coming, very prompt. So when we have this HFCC programs, and we have invited a lot of phone lines. The lines are really bad, but we can hear the people judging how we are covering the news, whether it is realistic, and it's real keen competition, because the Democratic Voice of Burma, they have planted, because theirs is a sort of mission where they have voiced all these opposition voices. They have the people, and they have their sort of mobiles spread out. So even though they covered every detail from their view, they judged. The people make judgment comparing to BBC, because not only we filter the news, the pictures, but we also listen to the people, whether we are giving a balanced view or whether we are giving enough good in-depth analysis, or whether we are giving what we call this a fair picture. So in fact, we can say that we are giving a very sort of good news coverage for the interest of the people so far.
You want to say that?
Yes, I just want to say that the internet is just it's not one way. It's a two-way street, and I think our job, journalism, is very much like theatre. Really, you can have it without a script, but it's always a relationship between a spectator and performer, and the same is actually between a reader or a viewer and whoever's doing the news. And the way perhaps you can do Othello or Shakespeare in different times or different places with different interpretation, because the audience coming with different background and culture of what's going on. The same with the internet. The internet now has become a reality. So whatever any story you do, whether it's actually a home story or a foreign story, the people, the readers, would have actually known something about it, either to confirm it or to contradict it, because everyone now logs on the internet.
Yes, Ed. Ed there, Ed Buyami. That Ed.
When Saha's widower talked about the enemies of journalism, he heartbreakingly was referring to people who kill journalists. That's fairly simple. But my worry is sometimes that some of the enemies of journalism run journalism now. Christiane, you made estimable reference to that challenge that we undertook, I think, in Sarajevo, and it's happened many times before in Since I'm Sure, whereby the journalists have to take on the lexicon of the political class. And in that instance, I think we got backing from our editors. I think our editors were pretty good in challenging the culpable sort of appeasement and impotence of people like Douglas Hurd and others, you know, that this was not the way they said it was. But since then, there have been some pretty bitter experiences. Particularly, I think there was a reference made to the run-up to the Iraq War and WMD, when we've had the opposite experience, and our superiors have actually found themselves far more the masters, the servants of their masters in the political class. I'm thinking of my own paper, The Observer, a forthcoming book about that coming out. The New York Times was mentioned earlier, certain Judith Miller and so on, where we have not managed to change the lexicon of the political class at all. Is the panel satisfied that the enemies of journalism are all without the profession, or are we, as journalists on the front line, can we continue to have the confidence that we had in Sarajevo in our superiors to confront the political class when we need to, or is it all getting a little bit murky as the politics of spin seeks to take over our business?
Well, my newspaper tends to attack the political class if it was run by Tony Blair, and I'm not sure it was entirely to do with whether his policies were right or not. But what I'm slightly worried about, Ed, is, Martin Bell said that we must have the politics or the journalism of attachment, i.e. you go in, you do things, and then you decide who are the good guys, who are the bad guys. Now, as you know, because you've done more wars than I have, but I've done a few, is that the lines between the guys with the white cowboy hats and the ones with the black cowboy, it's not as clear-cut as that. And I covered a massacre of people in Bosnia, and I knew that the world's press and everybody decided that every Serb in that country was a black-hearted villain. So when I said this is a massacre, I want you write about it. No, no. Because these were Serb civilians who'd been killed by, as you probably know, one of the Bosniak people who's now actually at The Hague. But nobody wanted to have the storyline confused by saying some people on the black-hearted side, you know, I don't deserve. And there was somebody, and I won't mention the person's name, who came up to me after this article appeared and said, you know, the Serbs deserved, and this is, you know, these were people who were disabled, old ladies, people who couldn't flee, they deserved what they got. And because they supported Milosevic. I said, you don't know. They were civilians. You don't know if they did support Milosevic. And she said, they're Serbs. That's enough for me. Now, that is exactly the jihadist argument, which is, I don't care if we kill lots of civilians because in America or here because they supported Blair and Bush. You don't know they did. And I sometimes think we're so keen on our own moral superiority as journalists that we decide that one lot of people are irredeemably evil and the other are all victims. And as you know perfectly well, that's not the way it is in war.
I think what's very important for the layperson to understand is that there's a fundamental distinction between reporting and comment. Now, when a newspaper, a news organisation sends a correspondent to a country, to Burma, to Iraq, to anywhere, what they're looking for is a story of what is really going on the ground. They're not looking for an interpretation. They're looking for facts. All of us, whatever our political persuasions, need to have the facts. Once we have the facts, we can then form a judgment. And Iraq is a very good case in point. I mean, I, for example, as most of you probably know, supported the overthrow of Saddam Hussein's regime. I still think it was a very good idea. But when we send telegraph reporters to Iraq, we don't expect them to reflect that view. We want to know what's going on. And often what they come up with, for those of us who supported the war, was deeply unpalatable. But you don't stop it being published. You publish it because people deserve to know the facts. And that really lies at the heart of all foreign corresponding, as far as I'm concerned.
And I think it lies at the heart, to an extent, of Ed's question, too. I think this, but from a personal perspective and point of view, I would say that this non-fact-based rush to commentary and editorializing and ideology and political views, confusing fact-based reporting with your own personal view is an enemy of journalism. There is a space for commentary and editorial, and a space, as Con pointed out, and as I truly believe, for fact-based reporting. And now more than ever, because so much of the media space is taken up by individuals' points of view. So I think within there are enemies of journalism, and I also think that the increasingly homogeneous ownership of various outlets, corporations with nothing to do with journalism owning certain media outlets, corporations which are journalistic corporations owning too many. I think there's a lot of problem like that, and unless our bosses and our organizations are willing to stand for journalism rather than following whatever political or ideological issue of the day, then I think that is a problem, and that is a problem within our organizations sometimes. And I think it was a problem in Iraq, in the run-up to the Iraq War. What about you, Ali, in terms of, again, sort of trying to figure out what's coming out of Iran? And we keep harping on that because it is the Iraq of today, if you like. We're hearing the same noises. We don't know what's going to happen, but a lot of similar bellicose language is going on. And a lot of, for instance, I get confused knowing, is what General Petraeus said correct? Is what, is what the British say correct? Is what others say? It's very confusing to know, are there shipments coming across of weapons and trainers into Iraq? What's going on with the nuclear situation? Is what El Baradei said? There's so much competing and conflicting information out there. How do we get to the nub of the story as journalists?
Sure. The thing is, from a journalistic point of view, we have to appreciate the fact that the Iranian government, after 27 years of establishing its pillars in terms of a very coherent constitution, and having 27 elections, which I had experienced 24 of them in my lifetime back in Iran, with strong actually public participation, whether we do like it or we don't like it. The reason actually people participate, it's a matter of discussion from political scientists and others. But there is a rising ideology actually in Iran, and the government does have a very widespread power institutionals across the country. So for journalists to go to the somewhere to find the facts that we in the West are desperate to find out, for example, really that ship was full of weapons of mass destruction, for example, to Bandar Abbas, or in Natanz, is there any really illegal nuclear weapons activity? It's very, very difficult in case of Iran. What in fact we are doing is a matter of accurate reflection of Iranian society to the West, to see that, to show that it's not a monolithic society, and in return encourage the journalists to report back to the society that the West is not monolithic at the same time as being portrayed by government propaganda, because that the power in fact that government does have and it can exert against the international community comes from really internal support, and that support has to be tackled from the root. And through free and fair journalism, we think that we can actually give a broader picture for the people, and in medium term, slowing down this fundamental Shia, political Shia, which is actually behind all this activity. But for these particular events, as you are pointing out, of course, we will have hopefully in near future people who are going to be signed up for each particular field and then reporting on that particular
Anybody else?
Yes. My name is Robert Papstein. I'm speaking to you from 20 years of conflict journalism, photojournalism. I started in Vietnam and finished before Sarajevo. I mean, there are two questions, really. One of them is the question of how much information is coming out of Myanmar. First thing is, do we have an accurate portrayal of what